Hi, I'm Ralph Dimichis. I'm one of the astrologers of the Planetary calendar, along with Lonnie Dimichis, and this is our annual Chinese New Year forecast. We've been doing this for, I guess, over 25 years now. And it's actually remarkably accurate. And I realized over the years, the only times when we've been off is when we have been too optimistic. In other words, we could see it was going to be bad, but we didn't want it to be that bad. So we didn't report it as quite as bad as it could be, because, for instance, there's been some years when it's been very difficult. So this is a global forecast. It's going to have multiple parts. The first part is going to be strategy for this year, timing. How do you time the year? Okay. After that, we're going to do a forecast for the Americas. Then after that, we're going to do a forecast for Europe and the Middle East. And then finally, we're going to do a forecast for Asia. So depending upon where you're living, it'll be more or less interesting to you. Now, this year, there's two eclipses, okay? This year, the two eclipses are only twins. In other words, there's a new moon and a full moon eclipse. Some years you get 3 in a row. Those are no fun. This year it's just 2, so that's not too bad. The first set of eclipses are going to start in mid-March, going from March 13th to March 29th, okay? Between the 13th and the 29th, don't plan anything big. Don't plan weddings. Don't plan, big dinners or big events. They're emotionally very intense. You'd like to avoid that kind of emotional intensity. Don't plan any, medical operations or things like that. Nothing between those dates, okay? The second big one is going to be between September 7th and September 22nd, okay? Another big time, so that's a big one. Now the March one is the most problematic month of the year. Just so you know, March is going to be a difficult one. So as we go forward, when I say March, you'll know why. Now, the other thing that's going on in Mercury retrogrades, there's going to be 3 of them. There's always 3 every year. And during Mercury retrogrades, anything to do with communication goes a little wacky. It takes 2 and 3 tries. So, it's not a great time to buy a new phone, for instance. It's not a great time to sign contracts. On the other hand, when Mercury's running fast, good time to do it. But when Mercury's running retrograde, a good time to clean the closets out. Good time to go back and cover things you did before. And when are the Mercury retrogrades this year? Okay, it's March 14th to April 7th, then July 17th to August 11th, and then from November 9th to November 29th. Now, if you haven't written this down, don't worry. If you just go down and read the notes in the underneath the video, we have included all those dates there, and the entire text is going to be there in great detail. Okay? And as we go into 2025, which is the year of the wood snake, it's going to start off slow. Okay? And the reason is you've got a couple of major planets that are retrograde, including Mars retrograde. The first month or so is going to feel very frustrating. It's going to feel slow. It's not going to be until like the mid to end of February when things start moving forward. That's when Jupiter's going to turn direct. Okay? Up to that point, that's going to be the issue. It's important to realize that the second half of 2024 and a major portion of 2025 are monumental times. Why? Because a lot of the outer planets, the ones that have these long transits, are changing sign. And realize they stay in the sign sometimes 7 to 8, 10 years. So when they're changing sign, this is a big thing. It all started with Uranus, or not Uranus, it started with Pluto moving into Aquarius, which took an amazingly long time to get there. But it's moved into Aquarius. Now you're going to have, this year you're going to have Uranus is going to change sign, Neptune is going to change sign, Saturn is going to change sign. Okay, and this is all happening in the course of the year. These are big shifts, especially because a lot of these are late in the zodiac. So we're having this very strong sense of a big cycle coming to an end and a new beginning between 24 and 2025. Okay? Now, once you get past, the second part of February and things start moving forward, then we run smack dab into March. Okay? March, like I said, it's got the 2 eclipses going on. And then also, as you just heard, we also have from the 14th to April 7th, Mercury retrograde at the same time, just like complicate things at the same time. And then let's see what else is going on. And also the one thing that is kind of working in your favor during this time, and realize that people are going to be very worried in the first part of the year. There's just a real strong sense of that. Let people share that. The one thing that's working in your favor at the beginning part of the year, where everything else is frustrating, is Mercury is moving fast. And when Mercury moves fast, until you get up to that retrograde, especially the beginning of March, because Mercury will start slowing down, those first couple of months, you'll be able to get a lot of communication stuff done. So in terms of getting the physical projects moving along, you may have a hard time with it, but you'll do real well moving the communication forward, the marketing stuff forward. You can do really well with that kind of stuff. And then finally, when you get to January 29th, this is another date I've got to mention. That is the Chinese New Year, the beginning of the wood snake. So everyone should celebrate at that time, and that's when we begin, the next Chinese New Year. That's the new moon in Aquarius, and then we're going to be moving on into the next growing cycle. So remember, after the end of February or middle of February, events will pick up quite a bit. March is just complicated. Just be prepared. Don't, like I said, if you can avoid scheduling around March, please do. Okay? Now, the other thing that happens in March is that Neptune is going to enter Aries. And Neptune, remember, it takes 180 years or so to go around the zodiac, so it's going to be there until 2029. Okay? And the last time that it was there, it includes part of the time of the American Civil War. The end of slavery, of course. It also includes the first transcontinental railroad. It also includes the sale of Alaska from the Russians to the Americans. Okay, and it was also the period of time when the major legal case went in place, when it said that if you were a state, if you joined the Union, you couldn't leave. That was a big turning point, going back to the original Constitution. That many of the states that actually joined the original 13 colonies said, well, as long as we can leave if we want to. And they said, oh yeah, you can leave. And then during this period of time, they said, no, you can't. So March is a very, very complicated time, okay? Now, when you get to May, it calms down because you're past the eclipses, you're pretty much past the retrogrades, but now Saturn is going to enter Aries. So now we've had Neptune enter Aries, which remember is the sign of the ram, the sign of the lamb, it's the new cycle. Now Saturn's going to enter Aries, okay? The last time Saturn was Aries was during the later part of the Clinton administration, which was financially a really good time. Unfortunately, they did a lot of impulsive stuff related to housing. Saturn is housing, Aries, new housing, people being able to get mortgages very, very inexpensively, then led to the meltdown, the economic meltdown in 2008 as all this stuff started falling apart. So it's going to have potential to be very good, but you have to watch out that you don't get carried away, because there'd be a tendency towards impulsive actions that have related to very physical things, because it's Saturn. Now, June, events are going to move along real easily. June's like, if you're going to schedule stuff that's going to be fun, schedule for June, because June is actually going to be very, very cool. The one thing that happens that's very cool in June is that Jupiter is going to enter the sign of the crab. This is called its exalted position. Whenever it's there, tends to do very well. But be prepared in June for some big economic news, because June and Saturn are going to be square. And when they do, big things happen in the economy. It can be good things. It can also be difficult things, depending upon where you are in that equation. July. Remember how I said it's a really momentous time? In July, Uranus, which stays in the sign for 7 years, is going to enter Gemini, the twins. Okay? The last time Uranus was in Gemini, it was 84 years ago, was right at the beginning of the Second World War, and it was literally within a day of when women officially became part of the U.S. military for the first time. So it's a very kind of momentous thing. And the thing about it is Uranus in Gemini, the twins, it has to do with the common people. Uranus has to do with a change of how we see them. So whenever Uranus has gone into Gemini, there's been a big fight about human rights and about freedom. Every 84 years when we've had Uranus go into the sign, because the United States was founded with Uranus in Gemini, we've been in some type of fight over freedom, over democracy, over the people's rights. So Like I said, very momentous year that we're coming into, okay? August is a little bit like June, that is the easiest month. In fact, of all the different months, August is probably the easiest month of the year, so all you Leos, you can be happy. Though you do have to realize that as you go into September, October, November, you may feel like the economy stalls, that it starts just stalling out. And there might be a lot of progress early in the year, but the time we get to the end of the year, a lot of people are going to feel like they backslid. Like if they were uncautious going along, they could feel like they really backslid, because there's going to be a bunch of planets turn retrograde, and all of a sudden everything's going to kind of stall out later in the year, which happens a lot just in recent years because of where the outer planets are related to the sun. Okay, September. Remember, we have those eclipses, those 2 eclipses going on. You also have a couple of planets changing sign and changing direction, okay, including backing into one sign. So I guess this is where you feel it's going to stall. And then you can have the fall equinox. In October, once again, like I said, the big stuff is going to stall, but Mars and Mercury are moving fast. So in terms of doing your personal projects, plan to do them in October, that time of year, things that relate to you, anything to do with physical stuff, anything to do with you want to accomplish a practical task, great time to do it. November has all kinds of stuff going on because Jupiter's going to turn retrograde, and whenever Jupiter turns retrograde, things slow down. Saturn's going to turn direct, so you're going to get this mixed message thing. And then Uranus, which has gone into Gemini, has gone retrograde and it's going to back into Taurus. So I mean, it's a lot of mixed messages. But then December, Neptune's going to turn direct. And finally, the year end is going to end pretty smoothly. Though, still not picking up speed. Like I said, people may feel like they backslid a bit. But in terms of planning the year out, read the notes, because a lot of stuff is going to go on. And you have to really be careful in terms of how you time where you're going to put your best efforts. And if you decide you're going to do it in the middle of March, we're going to start a whole campaign, a marketing campaign in the middle of March, you're going to be getting headaches that you don't need to have, just by waiting a little bit or planning a little bit better. And that's what the strategizing video is all about. So be well. Now, if you don't have your calendar, planetary calendar, make sure you get it. You can get it at planetarycalendar.com. The strategy stuff is there. And one of the main reasons for the planetary calendar is to have a great strategy. And this is another part of our Chinese New Year forecast for the year of the wood snake. And this is the one related to the Americas. If you didn't see our strategizing one, make sure you watch that, because it's going to be very helpful. After this will be the one on Europe and another one on Asia. What's happening in the Americas this year? Guess what? The United States is not the headliner this year. We have been the headliners in previous years. This ain't it. We're not the headliners. This year, all the major planets in terms of at the Chinese New Year being in the sky, they're someplace else. Most of them are over Europe. Some are over Asia. Over the United States, the skies are almost clear. Now, that doesn't mean we're in the clear. Why? Because there's lines above and there's lines below. And underneath, pulling from the Earth, are Jupiter and Uranus. What that means is when you have what are called planets at the icy, it means they ground you. Like, for instance, if you move to a place where you have the moon or the sun icy, you get there, it's like you're magnetically attached to the place because you feel home there, because these icy lines are about home. And so in the United States, we're going to have a very strong sense of feeling at home and being very focused on our own country. Americans are not going to be real interested in what's happening out there in the world, okay? Now, part of this is going to be a good number of people remember the last time Trump was in office as being very chaotic. And so there's going to be a big push for people to say, I don't want to know about it. I'm going to attend to my stuff, to my family, to my work, and I'm just kind of block that out, okay? And they have a good reason for that, because the two big lines that are here are Jupiter in Gemini, Trump, actually, and Pence were both born in Gemini, And that's Jupiter in Gemini is a retrograde, which means coming back line runs along the East Coast, off the coast of Washington, D.C., and then just inland, up along where the Mississippi is, going right up through New Orleans all the way up to Chicago, is the Uranus in Taurus line. And the hallmark of Uranus in Taurus has been climate change. Ever since Uranus in Taurus has been in Taurus, we have had massive climate change issues. And any place where Uranus shows up that year, overhead or from the IC, is in for it. Well, this year it runs right up through the Mississippi River. So you have to figure that there's a very good chance they're going to have big issues. Having Jupiter off the coast, equally bad. It's Jupiter in Gemini, air, wind, electricity, fire, electrical issues off the coast, and close enough to Uranus, because Jupiter has a big field. Jupiter, is very influential. It's a big planet. It's going to ramp up Uranus energy, and Uranus energy is chaotic. So you have to figure that between the East Coast all the way over into the Mississippi Valley, there's going to be a lot of climatic issues. There's also going to be a lot of political issues. There's going to be a lot of chaos going on. When we look at the charts for the East Coast, all the planets are up at the rising. It's tons of stuff in Aquarius, tons of stuff in Pisces, which means all like groups and governments, and Mars, which is in the sign of the Crab, retrograde, is very frustrating. It's going to be a very frustrating year in many ways, but especially in the East Coast, especially in the Northeast, because that's the spot where Jupiter almost hits landfall, is all the way up in the Northeast. So the East Coast, Washington, D.C. is going to be very, very chaotic. It's going to be like a big marketplace. It's going to like everyone went to the carnival or everyone went to town on Saturday to buy things. The whole thing is going to really feel like a marketplace. There's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing. Okay. What's funny is a lot of it is going to be run from the West Coast, from the big companies there, because of the 50 states, the state that has the most number of Fortune 500 companies is California, and the largest number of them are in the Bay Area, which is incidentally Kamala Harris's neighborhood. And so they're going to have a lot of influence over what's happening in Washington, but it's going to be very chaotic. And like I said, the real big issue that we're worried about are these climatic changes. Big hurricanes. We've had a number of really big hurricane seasons in recent years. And having Jupiter off the coast and Uranus there really kicks it up into high gear. So if you do live in that area, please prepare well. Also, because of the way they're positioned, we'll run into the western coast of South America. Okay, Mexico doesn't have a lot of issues, though around the Yucatan they could get hit pretty badly, but it's the western coast of South America that will suffer from a lot of these same types of issues. Where the eastern coast, Brazil and such, they're not in line for it. They'll actually have a little more stability this year. In the west part of the United States, starting from probably from Kansas west, is very quiet. There's almost nothing overhead. There are two bodies that are overhead, and this is interesting. It's Vesta, the asteroid, and Juno. Now, Vesta has a lot to do with workers' rights. It has to do with women's rights, but it has a lot to do with workers' rights. So workers' rights are going to be a real big issue, and they're both in the sign of the eagle, aka Scorpio. So a lot of stuff about the power of workers is going to be a real big issue, and it's Juno, the wife, and has a lot to do with reproductive rights. So the issue of reproductive rights, especially in the sign of Scorpio or the eagle, is the feminine sign of Mars, is going to be very powerful this year. And what's interesting, because there's no other major planets overhead, there's no competing voices. No one's coming back and saying, no, women shouldn't have this right. No, you're not going to hear it. Especially because of what happened in the election recently. You have a lot of people on the other side who are saying, no, we have to speak up about these issues. It's going to get a little overwhelming between workers' rights and reproductive rights. It's going to get very prominent this year. the power of women is going to be very evident this year. But like I said, once you get out to the West Coast, you get to the Midwest and the West Coast, it's very calm. There's not a lot going on. In California, we have one major line that goes up, which is a Pallas Athena line, which relates to attorneys. And when we look at the chart in California and the West Coast, the one thing you do see there is a lot of legal cases. A lot of legal cases. In the chart, it has Jupiter in Gemini in the 7th house. That's classic, that's the courts. Going back to the courts because it's retrograde, the sun and moon are in the 3rd house, which has a lot to do with attorneys and advocates. And like I said, Pallas Athena running through the coast. So this is very similar to last time Trump was in office when they would do things that, this is a tradition actually with California. Anytime Washington does something that California doesn't like, they take them to court. And then they keep them in court for years because California is a big state with a lot of money. So we're going to see a lot of that happening this year. So anyone who loves watching shows about law are going to be very happy this year. It's going to be a great year for them. It's going to be a great year for attorneys in the West Coast. Anyone who works as an attorney on the West Coast that has the possibility of doing these kind of cases, great billing this year. So now, very little going on in the Pacific, very quiet. But like I said, this is the real big division between a lot of chaos, a lot of climatic issues on the East Coast, and on the West Coast, much quieter. One thing that I did show up, it looks like that a lot of money on the West Coast is going to go to fire mitigation, like in other words, preventing fires. A lot of money is going to go into that, into protecting homes. It's going to be a big issue this year. But that's pretty much what's going on in the United States. Go down into the notes. You can read the detailed description about this. It's kind of interesting. It goes into things I didn't cover here because how much are you going to remember after all when you hear it? But you might remember it if you read it. I'm going to do the Chinese New Year forecast for the wood snake for Europe. Okay, and you're going to want to go down and read the notes underneath this because it's pretty detailed, but I'm going to give you the big picture. Essentially, what's going to be happening in Europe this year is it's very divided over the western part of Europe, including France, England, Germany, Spain, Portugal, Ireland. You have Pluto, Mercury, the sun and the moon. Okay? Very positive, a lot of energy. The ones who really see a lot of energy, Ireland and Spain and Portugal. In fact, it wouldn't be at all surprised to see that if the Irish independent movement really picked up speed this year. Ireland is a Gemini country with a Gemini moon. Jupiter's in Gemini. Uranus is about to go into Gemini. This could really kick up some dust. Okay, and the sun-moon line is running right down there, right between England and Ireland. It runs down into Spain and Portugal. Spain and Portugal are right on these lines. These are two of the best performing economies in Europe right now. They're going to get really charged up due to tourism. And also, as the boomers are retiring, you have a lot of boomers from the United States and other countries moving to Spain and Portugal as a wonderful place to live that is less expensive and sunny. So it's just really helping their economy. And with the Irish, a lot of it has to do with the fact that because of Brexit, it screwed up their borders and it screwed up their trading with Europe. And trade with Europe is a big part of how they make their money. And they really feel like this English mistake is really holding them back. So I think we could really see that movement take off this time of year. Now, on the other side of Europe, right, you have Russia and Ukraine, and also south of there you have Israel and Syria. Okay, that's an entirely different story. Over there you have Saturn. You have, when everyone says Saturn, think, Saturn, oh my God. You have Saturn, you have Venus, could be good, and then you have Neptune. Now, Neptune has a lot to do with oil, gas and oil, and Neptune is right over Moscow. And basically, Moscow's only bargaining chip right now is its oil. Now, the way they used to have leverage over Western Europe was they would sell a tremendous amount of natural gas through pipelines to Western Europe. But ever since Crimea, the invasion of Crimea, Europe has moved away from Russian oil. They're down to like 10 or 20% of what they used to be. So Russia's having to sell all their oil in India, in China, where it's much more expensive to ship, so they make less money. And they don't have leverage. They can't say, I'm going to cut the oil off, the gas off to turn off the heat in Europe, but Europe will say, oh, that's okay, we have other sources now. So Russia's really lost its leverage. At the same time, they're having to be increasingly dependent upon Korea, North Korea, and China. And you can see that in the lines, the way the lines work, the lines are connected. Now, the one saving grace in all of this is Venus. You see, Saturn runs right down through Ukraine. And so Ukraine is really hunkered down. They're stuck, they're on the walls there. They're not moving anyplace. They're gotten used to suffering, and they will hang in there. That same Saturn line, unfortunately, runs right down through Sudan. And if you don't follow these things, Sudan is probably right now the worst humanitarian tragedy we have on the planet. But Saturn runs right through the two of them. So it's in Pisces, a sign that's known for compassion but also suffering. You see, both of them are in for it this year, so it's not going to resolve completely. But the one saving grace we have is right between Neptune and Saturn is Venus. And it's Venus in Pisces. It's called the exalted position. It's the colleague position. And it goes back to that Jupiter in Gemini. What Jupiter in Gemini is negotiations. So there's a real possibility that in this coming year that there will be negotiations for a peace. And these same lines run down to Israel and Syria, two other hot spots. So there's a real possibility that in both places, we could finally see some resolution through having a good discussion, saying, well, let's trade a little bit here. The thing about it is that even though it may seem like, oh, the right people came along to do this, no, it's about oil, Neptune, and it's about authority. The leaders in both cases, Netanyahu and Putin, are really getting worried, and also Zelensky in Ukraine are all getting worried that because of the length this has gone on, that their people are going to turn against them. They're really worried about losing authority. There's a certain amount of healthy paranoia going on there. So between that and also the desire to be able to trade oil more effectively is a real big factor here. So it's really, that's the factor there. Now, one of the reasons why this could actually work, and I'm actually doing this from the planets. I'm not just saying, oh, this sounds good. The reason is that with Biden leaving office, Biden's born in the sign of the eagle. He's a long thinker, Scorpio. He's a long-term thinker. He's born at the full moon. He's born with Sagittarius. This man thinks long-term. He has been happy to punish the Russians, punish Moscow, punish Putin for what they did to the elections when they interfered with elections. And he's been bleeding them dry through giving money to Ukraine. He's been doing this for years. We're at the point now where, okay, maybe they bled enough out. And the reason is, you see, the United States foreign policy is not about destroying other countries. When they think, oh, we could drop a bomb. No, that's not their policy. Their policy is, no, we just want them a little weaker than us. And then we want to be in a situation where we can be nice enough to them that we can still do business with them. Because ultimately, the United States is founded in the sign of the crab. It has a bunch of Gemini in there. It likes to do business. And that's the policy, though, with the shift of administration, the thing about Trump is he's not a long-range thinker. He's a short-range thinker. Biden's a long-range thinker, so he'll think, oh, well, we can make a deal on this. We can solve this right now. We can make the deal. And so it may be that people feel like, yes, this is the time when we can settle this thing. So that is the peace dove in the middle of these horrible situations. That same thing with Netanyahu. He's really worried about losing authority and losing funding. So once again, it's about power. It's about petrochemicals. It's about authority. So the one big thing about this is because of this division, you have this group of planets on one side, this group of planets on the other side. Europe it will feel very divided this year. You're going to have the European Union in the middle, the office trying to keep it corralled, but it's going to feel very divided. And they will be one of the two big places in news. They will be the headliners this year because they have all the planets overhead. That's why I said the United States is not going to be the headliners. Europe is going to be the headliners. The other one is going to be Asia, especially China. But Europe is going to be the big headliner this year. So that's what's happening. You can read all the notes down there below in the notes section. And make sure you get your planetary calendar so you can plan your year effectively. You find it at planetarycalendar.com. Wishing you a wonderful year of the wood snake.